Well friends, the holiday season is upon us once again, and whether you spent your time buying cool presents for all your family or were just trying to see how long you could go without hearing Last Christmas by Wham, I hope you're ready to settle down and have a relaxing end to the year. As for me, well, I've been pretty busy, but I figured there's probably time to squeeze out one more video to round out the year. Now, this time last year, I released a video covering a selection of Christmas themed games available on the PlayStation. It was a mixed bag, I guess you could say. We got some presents, we got some coal, and I may have also outed how bad I am at video games in the process. But this year, I'd like to take a look at something a little bit different. Now, as some of you may know, I spend a lot of time researching some of the weird and wonderful titles that make their way to the PlayStation, and I'm oftentimes stunned to see some of the games that are out there, and ever since I came across this particular game, I've been dying to check it out. So I'm going to assume most of you are familiar with Raymond Brigg's The Snowman, a picture book first released in the 70s that was turned into an animated feature film in 1982 by Channel 4. It's hard to understate the cultural significance of this animated film, at least over here in the UK and Ireland anyway. I don't think there was a kid born in the 80s or 90s who hasn't seen this thing, the story of a boy and a snowman that magically gets brought to life. It's either very uplifting or very depressing depending on who you're asking, and notably, it is also completely devoid of dialogue outside of the iconic theme Walking in the Air, which was written by Howard Blake, that has transcended the animated feature and become more or less a classic Christmas song in its own right.
We're walking in the air.
Hell, The Snowman even featured a revised opening sequence with David Bowie, and if Bowie is plugging your stuff, you know it's good. So why are we talking about this old animated feature from the 80s? Well, to my surprise, it turns out there was a Snowman video game released on the PlayStation, and even more surprisingly, it was a Japan-only exclusive, so let's go walk in the air, why don't we? So, The Snowman by Raymond Brigg made its way to the PS1 in Japan in December of 1995, so not only did it release on an appropriate month, but it's a pretty early release for the platform. Now, I think it's worth noting this is absolutely not the only Snowman game out there. Of course, like every piece of British media created in the 80s, there's your typical home computer game made for your Commodores and your Spectrums. It plays about as well as you'd expect. Certainly not a patch on Granny's Garden anyway, that's for sure. And more recently, there was a mobile game created for the sequel to the original film called The Snowman and the Snow Dog. It even came out on Windows Phone. Remember that? As for our PS1 game though, it turns out The Snowman is actually a children's activity center title, which, you know, given the target market for this thing, isn't all that surprising. That's my hopes for a snowman themed FPS out the window, I guess. And seeing that it's an activity center game, it also probably won't come as a surprise that this is a port of a game originally released on PCs, once again adding to the long list of Japan-only PC to PS1 ports. Now, for the most part, the PS1 version is mostly a straight copy of the PC original with a few UI changes and also a bunch of Japanese, but there is some PS1 exclusive content too, which we will of course cover shortly. So first off, the game uses a mouse-style cursor to control the menus. Unfortunately, there is no mouse support available, but honestly, navigating around the screen with the D-pad, it's not the worst thing in the world. Although there is a nice little rendition of Walking in the Air in the menu. That's fun. Now, the game as a whole can be broken down into 3 separate parts: an interactive storybook, mini-games, and also a video section. I guess we should start with the video section, which I was pleasantly surprised to find allows you to watch the whole original uncut version of the animated film, albeit in a relatively small window with a less than ideal resolution, but for 1995, it's honestly not that bad. The sound quality, on the other hand, is really rather good, clearly taking full advantage of the PS1 CD technology to provide a crisp, clear audio stream that really does highlight how good Howard Blake's score is for this movie. You know, it's been a long time since I watched this thing in full, and really as a standalone piece, it holds up really well. It's the kind of thing you could show to children nowadays for the first time, and it should still resonate with them just as strongly as it did with kids in the 80s. And of course, seeing as there's no dialogue at any point, it's also a universal piece of media, meaning anybody in the world, no matter the language they speak, can pick up and understand this simple story, and maybe have a little cry at the end too, for good measure. Now, is this the best way to watch this film? Clearly not. I mean, you can go watch it on YouTube right now for free if you like, but you know, for 1995, this would have done me just fine, and even though the film is quite short, coming in at just over 25 minutes, the little chapter section at the bottom is a nice feature too, meaning you can skip to your favorite parts with ease for return viewing. So yeah, the Snowman video game contains the entirety of the Snowman. Can't say most games of the era do that. Well, as long as we ain't talking about those Phoenix Games titles.
Okay, girls and boys.
Which we won't. So let's move on to the next part of the game, that being the interactive storybook. This is more or less a digital version of the original picture book that the animated feature was based on. You can flick from page to page and experience what we just saw in animated form, in a non-animated form. And as you can see, this is where the Japanese comes into play, allowing you to read along with the story, and if you click anywhere on the page, you get some lovely Japanese narration, courtesy of Japanese actress Keiko Takashita, a self-professed mega fan of the Snowman.
でも、スノーマンはそこにいません。あれは夢だったのかな?
Also, as a side note, she was in a movie released in the late 70s from legendary Japanese director Kihachi Okamoto called Blue Christmas, a really cool and unique movie about UFO sightings that turn people's blood blue. Definitely check it out if you're in the mood for something a little less traditional for a Christmas movie this year. Anyway, this text and dialogue is about the only real language barrier you'll face, if you even want to call it that. Obviously, both the film and picture book were designed to transcend language, so regardless of your Japanese knowledge, you won't be missing much. Also, similarly to the film, there is a handy chapter select page you can access from the main menu if you want to skip ahead to your favorite part. So, that just leaves us with the final part of the game to cover, the minigames. Now, if you want to access any of these, you actually have to do it through the storybook section. On certain pages, you'll see this little circular snowman icon at the top of the page, and clicking on this will bring you to one of 7 different minigames based around the particular page you are on. Of course, seeing as this was originally a kid-friendly activity center game originating on the PC, the games aren't exactly gonna blow your mind in the gameplay department, but we might as well take a look and see what each has in store. The first is a dress-up game in which you drag and drop various items of clothing onto our main character, who we'll just call Little Boy. Not much to say about this one other than dressing up a kid in his underpants is a little odd, but if you match up all the pieces of a particular outfit, you get a little animation. That's nice. Next up is a game where you click on little moles to make the boy draw a picture in the snow, pretty much like a connect the dots style game. I always found connect the dots pictures and puzzles a ton of fun as a kid, and truthfully, there's still something quite appealing about this to me even today, but this variant is very simple and there's only a handful of pictures, so you'll have seen all it has to offer in no time. After that, we have another dress-up game, but instead of a little boy, we have the titular snowman, which is much more fun. Obviously, I tried to dress him up as normal as possible because I'm very exciting, but trying any of the weirder stuff just made him look a little scary, so yeah, let's move on. Up next, we have a game where a bunch of household items get placed into the wrong rooms, and it's up to us to put them back where they belong. Once again, this is another relatively simple game, but the concept just appeals to some Neanderthal aspect of my brain. Pick up an item and put it back where it belongs. I don't know why it's satisfying, but hey, it works for me. After that, we have a Simon Says style rhythm game. When the boy dances, you'll see these coloured spotlights. Pick the same spotlights in order at the top, and the snowmen will dance along with you. As the game goes on, naturally the number of inputs get harder to remember and more colours get added in as well. Nothing special by any means, but definitely the toughest of the included minigames, which is mostly down to my memory being terrible. Now the final 2 minigames are where things get a little bit interesting. Now remember earlier on I mentioned there was some PlayStation exclusive content. Well, all the minigames we've shown so far are all included in the PC version, but the final 2 are actually different from their PC counterparts. Over on the PC, we have a motorbike minigame where you have to open gates to help the snowman get out of a maze, and another game where a narrator tells you to find a snowman with a specific hat color, and if you click that snowman, they come up and join you for a little bit of flying in the air. On the PS1, however, the motorbike minigame has been replaced with this simple driving game where you have to dodge left and right to make it through various different gates until you reach your home. And the flying minigame now sees you directly controlling the snowman and the boy in the sky, trying to duck down and collect as many snowmen as you can along the way. Now obviously these new minigames aren't going to win any awards for gameplay and looks, but they very clearly have that PlayStation look and aesthetic, and seeing the snowman captured in this style is just kind of novel to me. And I think that can be said about the whole game really. It's hard to get excited over a simple children's activity center title, but the idea that this beloved British animated film from the 80s has this Japanese exclusive PS1 port that features exclusive 3D content and levels made specially for it, I don't know, I just think that's kinda neat.
I just think they're neat.
Well, that's about it for the Snowman on PS1. It's not something I'd recommend anybody go out of their way to buy or try, but it's a fun little Christmas curiosity all the same, and I hope you enjoyed exploring it with me. Now, before I say goodbye, I'd just like to say a special thank you for all the support this year. It's been a year of up and downs on a personal level, but the kindness everybody has shown me here on YouTube has been really heartwarming. So here's hoping I'll have some great stuff in store for you in 2022 to make it up to you. In the meantime though, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you and your family have a wonderful holiday season and New Year's, no matter how you choose to spend it. I'll of course be back with some more content as soon as I can, but until then, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you all very soon.